Welcome to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast, Synchromystic exploration of the ever-expanding now. Today we have a survey we did of a local area that is significant in the history of the place where I'm from. We'll get into that a little further today. Initially, when we arrived here at Turkey Hill, I was drawn to the field near the parking lot where, as you can see, there's some really large stones, maybe 3-4 feet high from ground level, and it seems like mounds, right? And we don't want to be too wishful in our thinking and our discernment, but they looked like mounds and they were in a straight line, and I noticed this straight line led right towards a path. Now this line was 3 or 4 boulders, pretty much for the most part underground, minus that one you saw in the previous picture. Well, maybe there's a vein of some sort of stone here, and since this field's clearly been farmed, the rest of the ground has significantly lowered and the stones have, remained where they are. That could be an explanation for the mounds. Now, curiously, something that's drawn my attention is these stone rows that we just sort of featured here in this portion of the clip. The stone rows are absolutely fascinating. I've seen them my whole life. I've always wondered what they were and why they seemingly lead to places where, based on the explanation they give us, if they were just used to carve out territories and make up boundary lines, then why do they seemingly lead to places like what we will see today in this video? There I am, standing up. The traditional explanation is fencing, but as you can see here, this is a remnants or evidence of a fence built in front of the stone line row here. So, based on that little rusty fence, I would say that they weren't using the stone row for a fence if they went and built that fence there. So it just, in some cases, defies our, let's say, contemporary explanation for these stone rows. Here's another example of a stone row that seemingly leads to nowhere. It just kind of goes down, dips down that valley there and off into the woods. Well, it comes back around and crosses the path here, goes up past these trees there, and then comes around, and you can see in this forest there's just a lot of stones, just so many different stones in the ground, and a couple ledges here and there. And like you see in this picture, the stone row starts on side of the path. It doesn't go along the path, it just kind of goes across the path and then goes up over the hill and sort of dissipates next to some trees that are seemingly growing on top of these rocks. So you can imagine the rocks have been there for quite a while. Here you can see some more stones all around the trees. There are lots and lots of stones, and they're all sort of on surface level. Now, as you'll see as this video goes on, it's pretty obvious there's a high amount of quartz in these stones that we're finding in this little forest. Now, some background information on where we are. Turkey Hill is the largest park in Orange. Here's some quartz in this stone here. It's the largest park in Orange, and Orange is a town that used to be a part of Milford in colonial times. And there was a Milford plantation. Governor of the Connecticut colony, Robert Treat, had a plantation here. He was one of the many members who were a part of this Milford, let's say, plantation, and they were very successful at buying land in a time when the Native Americans didn't have a concept of ownership of land. There's a lot of disputes that came up, and unfortunately the Native Americans were displaced because as they sold their land off, they realized that once they sold their land, they were no longer welcome in the places that were their homes. And like I said, they didn't understand, or at least we're told they didn't understand the concept of land ownership. Therefore, they, just thought, okay, well, we'll sell, we'll do this deal with you and let you hang out here like we hang out here. Well, no, the colonists had different ideas, and with the SEEEN, we're going to be diving into this time period and understanding this better as time goes on. But I think the stone rows are interesting because they give us a link into the past. So what we have here is known as a pedestaled boulder, or a partial pedestal boulder, where, as you can see, the boulder has been tilted on its side, whether by natural forces, a protrusion in the ground that's raised this boulder up like this, or possibly man-made. Whether made by Native Americans or not is also curious. We're not sure. I'm not sure. But considering the history of this place, Turkey Hill, like I said, being the largest park in Milford, and given that those Native Americans, the Wepawaug tribe, were displaced, there were 4, let's say, considerable, at least they're described as considerably sized settlements of Wepawaug Native Americans here in Milford. And over time, many of them left. There weren't many, we'll say, disputes between the colonists and the Milford Indians, or Wepawaug tribe, save for maybe one instance where during a slash and burn, the colonists were afraid that their whole town was going to get burnt to a crisp, and that was thought to have been a provoked attack on the side of the Indians, where some people may just say, well, that's part of their practice. Every fall they would burn the forest to make way for new plants to grow with fertile soil in the spring. That's one way to look at it. But for the most part, we're told that the relationship between the Wepawaug and the Milford colonists or planters was pretty benevolent. There was a battle between the Mohawks and the Wepawaug, and thanks to this Turkey Hill fort and many other forts along the river, in the Housatonic River, they were able to fend off against the Mohawks, using these forts in conjunction with their sentry towers. The Mohawks would come down from up New York, up north from the Housatonic River Valley, and they would raid other tribes and take hostages and plunder, and very similar to Vikings, curiously enough. And it was interesting to hear that in Milford, the Wepawaug were actually successful at defeating and fending off the Mohawk. There's even a swamp named Mohawk Swamp where the Mohawk were caught trying to sneak up on the Milford Indians. They were caught by English settlers, and the English settlers went and warned the Wepawags, we're told, and that gave them enough time to call in some backup using those sentry towers, and they were able to protect their women and children in the forts. And another interesting thing is the forts were typically built near swamps. Now, this is not swampy per se. There were quite a few I think they're called vernal pools in the forest, but it was not marsh by any means, and it was almost, I would say, half a mile, less than half a mile away from the Housatonic River. So anyways, here's what we found. So Native Americans have been known to utilize natural stone structures for ceremonial purposes, as well as to build stone structures for ceremonial use. Now, that's not to say that the ceremonial purpose is the extent of these structures. Had a purpose that went beyond ceremony. They could have been used to tell things like time of day, time of year. Those are very important to the Native Americans and any people, really. You need to know these things to be successful at farming and even preparing for cold seasons and whatnot. So it's pretty clear that that is the case. Now, here we find so many stones, it seems to be pointing towards this rocky area, these ledges that you'll see towards the end of the video here. also seemed very interesting how the stone rows would kind of come out of nowhere and make lines towards these mounds where there were many stones on top. Now, these stone rows were a combination of laced stones, which is the type of stone wall or stone row that leaves room for light to come through. Here's some more quartz, as you can see. Lots of quartz on these stones. But also there's these very large boulders that make up the stone walls, which is, evidence that these things have been here much longer than we suspected. Now, here you see the stone row coming up the hill, going over this sort of ridge line that had a parallel ridge line some 10, 20 feet away. And you even see stone alignments on top of this ridge. Now, whether or not these are built a long time ago or fairly recently, that's, for someone else to judge. But, placing stones on top of one another seems like a common practice for people who just enjoy nature and go out in the woods and see a pile of stones and put them together and make a little stone pile. So we're not claiming that this is evidence of, Native American stonework, but it is curious that this is right next to this wonderful birch tree that you can see right here. Very interesting how, it seems like these trees, and you'll see a picture that's pretty fascinating towards the end here. It seems like these trees have a very deep symbiotic relationship with the minerals, and I'm not a arborist or a geologist, but I know that in those fields of science, you use minerals to better understand what types of trees would grow in a certain area and vice versa. So here we have another strange, very, very large boulder, and if you'll see, there's sort of like a cupped out depression into the stone. To me, that might indicate some cobbling, like some stonework there where they would have come along and used a piece of iron to break it free for whatever purpose, who knows. But it does seem interesting. There are, black colorations to certain boulders that maybe suggest fire being used to heat up the stone in order to break pieces of it off. Here we have a very interesting stone, very large, almost 3 feet wide and a foot high. And it's in conjunction with several other stones and a very strange, well, not so strange, geological marker. It's strange in the sense that they put it up here with these other big boulders that are on top of this mound. There's one right there that I just jumped on top of, and we have several others around, and here we have a ledge. It's very beautiful area, very beautiful time of the year to go and check this kind of stuff out. Now, I think it's very clear, based on the research we've done, that there was indigenous people living in this area. Here we have a quartz stone, quartzite of some kind, I believe, and it's white. That's another interesting feature of this stone in particular. The color of it would maybe make it more visible, especially in certain times of the year, from far away, which we know certain quartz stones were used as beacons and thought of to have the Manitou spirit inside of them. Like I said, these stones were used for ceremonial purposes. That's not to say that the Native Americans put them there, but given what we've seen with the Coral Castle, I don't find it all that far-fetched to make at least a suspicion that these stones could have been put here with the help of some sort of metaphysical force. Now, here we have a very interesting carving in the stone. Not too far away from the geological marker is this sort of parallelogram shape, almost kind of like a diamond shape. And you can see there's 3 lines that intersect to create that parallelogram shape. And then the 4th line comes up towards the center, sort of making like an arrow out of one half of the the shape. I think this is some sort of directional carving, maybe indicating where the sun is rising and setting. If you'll notice, this half on the right side of the screen of the carving is pointing north, and it's pointing in the same direction. At least when I took these pictures, I was facing the same direction. So this picture and the geological survey picture are both facing north. So I will line those up side by side here. And yeah, very interesting to find this. Again, you know, we don't want to make any claims as to who put this there, but it is curious that this stone row leads to this mound where there are strange carvings in the stone. Another thing that we noticed were what looked like grooves and channels on certain rocks. That could be the cause, caused by water. But also we know that certain stones, like we said earlier, were used for ceremonial purposes and used for their shape. You know, certain stones might have collected water or been used as bowls for drying certain things, or smashing certain things into a pulp for cooking, or who knows what. If people were living in this area, then I think they would have been using the rocks for their for how they're shaped, and we hope to find more evidence of this as time goes on. But for now, this is our preliminary survey of Turkey Hill. Some of the stone rows, like I said, lace stone rows, meaning they have gaps through which light comes through, making them more visible on maybe certain times of the day or the year. And yeah, I think this is something that everyone should do. Go out and, without disturbing anything, without taking anything with you, just go out and explore. You know, here's this stone that's growing into the tree. I mean, that is just, if that doesn't show the symbiotic nature of this world that we're in, I don't know what else does. Look at how the tree is formed around the stone. It's really fascinating. And there was a couple other strange trees growing in strange ways, especially considering the rocks. You know, they would it looked like they would grab hold of a rock and use that to maybe get a better grip. But with that, folks, thank you for listening and watching the first episode of the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy Synchromystic exploration of the ever-expanding Now survey. We're evolving, we're expanding, just figuring things out one step at a time, and this is what we're doing next. So thank you for being here, and thank you for subscribing to the Patreon. We love you. Peace.